these are the Fed hiking and cutting cycles going back to the early 1970s. And you can see there's that sketch again where we've just started to dial down on rates as of late September. But after the Fed starts cutting rates, what does that usually mean for housing 12 months later? And the other thing I wanted to make sure that you see in here is there's only two soft landings in here. So what is a soft landing? It's when the Fed's able to start lowering interest rates and you don't get a recession. So we've only had a couple of those. We had one of those in the mid 1980s and then another one in the mid 1990s, which I'm going to call out on these next few slides. So let's go through this analysis, and I'm gonna explain each of these in terms of the methodology of how we did this, because I think that's useful too. Because you could do this in a variety of ways, and we kind of thought about different ways of doing it, but I think this is probably the cleanest and most apples. So this is looking at the last five of the last 9 rate cutting cycles, because we don't have enough history for looking at HELOC balances. But when we run that analysis, you can see that majority of the time, actually every time except for 2019, HELOC balances are up in the next 12 months after the Fed starts cutting rates. And there's that soft landing in 1995. So how do you think about this? And specifically because the 2019 being red initially was a head scratcher for me, but then I thought through it. The time period we're catching there is the Fed started cutting rates August 19th. 12 months later, which would be August 20th, HELOC balances were about 10% lower on a year over year, which makes sense actually because it captures that moment in time of where banks really just seized up during COVID on HELOCs. And so that I think explains part of what that negative 10% is for 2019. But every other period that you see in here, 12 months after the Fed starts cutting rates, HELOC balances are up nicely. And that soft landing is up 4%. So similar thought process as we go through this for other key metrics in housing. Well, let's look at what the change was in existing home sales. And for this one too, we don't have enough history to catch every rate cutting cycle, but we got 5 of the last 9. And you can see, aside from 2007, which was post subprime GFC, which makes sense, existing home sales are up pretty nicely 12 months after the Feds starts cutting rates. And so again, the way to think about that 2019 print is that Fed started cutting August 19, 12 months later, resale sales were up about 5%. And then we go through and look at the same type of analysis for home prices. In the green, every single cycle, 6 of the last 9, again, don't have enough history to catch every one. The only time home prices were down 12 months after the Fed started cutting rates was 07. We all know what 07 looked like, so that makes total sense. And then there you've got those soft landing years again. Single family rents. So single family rents, of all of the housing metrics that we look at, this is a big part of why a lot of people like the industry, very, very stable, both in good times and bad times. And so this is looking at the 6 of the last 9 Fed rate cutting cycles. And you can see that every single time, single family rents at a national level are up about low to mid single digits in the following 12 months after the Fed starts cutting rates. So that's a nice chart if you're in the single family rental space. And then multifamily, this was the most volatile of all of them. And so I kind of thought through this and it's like, okay, well, why would it be red in more instances and others? And I'm sure there's more nuance to this that we could probably spend a lot of time on. But my thought process in this was that multifamily starts and the apartment industry in general are much more tied to what's going on in the economy. Rents are driven by job growth. And so being that a soft landing is pretty rare when the Fed starts cutting rates, I think that helps explain why in the majority of cases, when you get a Fed rate cutting cycle, you actually do get a recession. And it helps explain, I think, why multifamily starts tend to go into the red and be weaker 12 months out than what some of these other for sale metrics and single family rental especially look like 12 months out from a rate cutting cycle. And then single family housing starts by and large, generally in the green 12 months after. And this catches every single Fed rate cutting cycle back to the 70s. And so the outlier on there is again 07, which is post GFC. But if you, and I did the math on this, which is up in the conclusion there, because I was curious. If you strip out 2007, when the Fed starts a rate cutting cycle 12 months out, the average growth for single family starts is 12%. So that's a nice like data point, I think, to have in your back pocket as you think about single family housing.